the Teach Pitch podcast. We are very excited to be launching a series of interviews for Teach Pitch, a global community of tens of thousands of subscribers from over 205 countries who all have a desire to improve the state of education in this world. And for these interviews, we have selected a number of our subscribers who have achieved great things. And by great, I mean amazing. Think of former presidents, entrepreneurs, fashion designers, hospital builders, non-profit founders, authors, journalists, doctors, etc. And what all our guests have in common is that despite their great success, they've encountered many enormous challenges. So what were these challenges and how did they overcome them? That is what we are going to be talking about here. My name is Aldo de Pap and I'm massively looking forward and very grateful you can join us in this journey. So sit back, relax and download the podcast here.
Being agile enough to say, okay, schools have shut down. How can we continue teaching? Online support, for example, children can't access school because there was a flooding.
Yeah.
Again, providing a platform where children can still engage and not be taken out of that school, because that interruption in most parts of the world, if they're not going to school for a prolonged period of time, they're very unlikely to go back because the parents just don't see the return on investment on their kids going to school.
A very warm welcome again to yet another episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, and particularly episode 30, season 2, where we are interviewing someone quite remarkable. She goes by the name of Naza Alakija, and she's of Iranian descent, but with a Nigerian last name, and she's a philanthropist. She is someone who, with her initiative, the SAGE Foundation, and you write that SAGE, so SAGE Foundation, is doing loads of great work on the level of girl empowerment, on the level of education, and on the level of environmental preservation. And she does that all, in my idea, with a new outlook on philanthropy. Previous philanthropic endeavors kind of look a little bit like you take the whole thing on your back. So an organization like the Gates Foundation, for instance, funds big time and gets involved majorly every step of the way to grow an initiative from A to Z. The SAGE Foundation has a slightly different approach. The SAGE Foundation gets involved, but does so also to mobilize other people. So there is a little bit of a approach whereby they say, yes, we're going to get involved, we're going to support you, but we're also going to find other people who want to get on board with this. So the ownership is not full on 100%. The ownership is different, and I think even more befitting with how philanthropy should work, because the success of a project is not only in just the funding, the success is also in how people respond to it, in the direct environment, but also on social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more to say for such an all-round approach to determine the success of a not-for-profit or charitable project. Naza and I talk about two specific projects that she's working with at the moment. One is a project called Hope Dies Last. You can find more information on that project on the website of the SAGE Foundation. It's particularly focused on fighting deforestation in the Amazon. There's a great video that was made that I can highly recommend. And another project that we're talking about is Giga, so Giga, which is an NFT project, an ongoing NFT project from UNICEF, and I think particularly UNICEF France, that is very worthy of your attention. And both projects are, I think, very cutting edge and very befitting with where we are today in the world of philanthropy. So I hope you will like this interview. Full disclosure with regards to the approach of the SAGE Foundation and kind of how Naza has approached this. She is part of a very entrepreneurial family, and they are, active all over the world, but most particularly in Nigeria, so in Africa. And they do lots of great work there. The Alakija family if you look at kind of their name and reputation, is also looking to fund many great initiatives and have also done well in business. So we just wanted our listeners to be aware that that is also kind of the way philanthropy can work. So there's a funding kind of line, we believe, from Naza's family to the Sage Foundation that got this all going. The work that Naza is doing and how she's personally involved with all of this and how she's really trying to change the world is remarkable and admirable. So do have a look at the Sage Foundation. Do have a look at Naza Alakija on Instagram. I think it's a great Instagram account, and she's doing great work. And I sincerely hope you will enjoy this interview. Naza Alakija on philanthropy.
This episode of the Teach Pitch podcast was recorded at the World Innovation Summit for Education, WISE, in Doha on December 9th, 2021. We are extremely grateful to the Qatar Foundation and WISE team who supported and sponsored us in bringing this together. More information about the WISE Summit can be found on their website, wise-qatar.org. Thanks a lot, WISE.
Good morning. Well, it's already our third interview with WISE on air, and they just keep on coming. Very exciting guests here at the second day of the 10th edition of the World Innovation Summit for Education here in Doha. We are coming at you online through a dedicated digital platform, but we're also here hearing from education leaders, policymakers, innovators, and practitioners. And I'm honored to have here next to me Naza Alakija, who is the founder of the Sage Foundation, an organization that finds, funds, and empowers grassroots movements which elevate women and girls and lead communities towards an environmentally resilient future. I love that tagline so much, Naza. That's because there's really so much in there when it speaks to women empowerment, girl empowerment, community building, but also the environment. So there's a lot in there, but still it's expressed very concisely. So compliments for that sentence and that mission. Let's talk a little bit about the approach of the Sage Foundation, because it's on one hand, it's philanthropy, but on the other hand, there's also kind of a fundraising component. So getting people on board to support these grassroots movements. Am I correct?
Yep, that's correct. One of the things that we really do take pride in is being able to bring solutions to grassroots movements. I mean, if today we're having a conversation, if I was to ask you, what are the 5 things that you can tell me that you can do to improve your life? You know better than anybody. So it's the same. We look at philanthropy and aid in the same way.
Yeah.
How do we support communities that need that nudge or a little bit of support just to get to be able to empower themselves?
Yeah.
And the other thing is we have quite an intersectional approach at how we look at philanthropy and aid. So looking at the bigger picture and looking at, how can we focus on women and girls, education and environment at the same time, simultaneously, to be able to achieve the long-term goals that we're trying to hit with the SDGs.
Yeah. And how do you identify these grassroots movements? Where does the journey start?
I guess it's just meeting different people, getting on ground and really getting to know the landscape and understanding what the fundamental needs are. And the communities generally know the movers and the shakers on ground. So it's really a contextual, like getting on ground, speaking to people, speaking to communities, and even working with governments to figure out where the gaps are and how we can fill them. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're currently involved in a great project entitled Hope Dies Last. I've watched the video on the website, and I recommend for all of you to do so, because it's about the Amazon. Am I correct?
Correct, yes. I had the privilege of actually meeting the Huni Quinn tribe running up to COP, and they were talking to me about the different solutions that they had for the issues around climate change, for example, the way their crops are being affected, flooding, deforestation. And, we spoke with them, and, we asked them, how can we support you? And, one of the things that they said to us is, let our voice be heard, and let our, and they're very joyful people. They're very, there's a very happy community despite everything that they're going through. It really, and that for me was so valuable, because sometimes when you're thinking about climate and the climate crisis, you kind of do lose hope a little bit. So when they came out with the sayings, "Hope dies last," it was quite remarkable. It was like that's the name of the campaign.
That's the tagline. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. No, 100%. So the Sage Foundation is helping, but you're also looking for other people to engage with you for this specific project to move against deforestation in the Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we partnered with One Tree Planted.
Mm-hmm.
They're an organization that plants a tree for every $1 that you donate. And it's again, I really believe in working, with one another, because we, one organization or one person cannot do everything.
Yeah.
So mobilizing everybody for me is definitely key.
Is key. Yeah. No, definitely. And yesterday we had Andrew Ash here from 1billion.org who won the $15 million X Prize from Elon Musk.
Wow.
And he also expressed a lot about how key it is to have the right partners, because he works in Malawi and Tanzania, and he does so much work in so many countries. He has a software that he builds, but the software needs to be customized, and you need people from local communities to carry that, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have that, then the investments you make don't go a long way, or it might go elsewhere or whatever more. So very clever that you're trying to partner with local people on the ground there. Yeah. I love on your site that you state you're deeply grateful for the role that education played in your life, and it really shows. You hold a degree in biomedical materials from the University of Manchester, diploma from University of Oxford in its artificial intelligence program, and you have also a certificate in climate change and environmental ethics, and currently doing a master's in international relations at Queen Mary University of London. So loads of academic movement going on there. How important is education to you?
Not very.
Oh, it's an afterthought.
Just an afterthought. No, I mean, for me, I was an immigrant. I left Iran at the age of 9, and I couldn't speak the language. I moved to the UK, where the culture was completely different, language was completely different. Everything was completely foreign. But so the only way I could assimilate and fit in essentially was to grasp onto my education in order to be able to learn how to speak English and to really be able to develop my own sense of identity and agency. So I know what education did for me, and I really as an immigrant, as somebody who had access to those tools, I want to be able to give that to everybody, because it really pushed me to become who I am today. And I was very lucky to have a mother that always advocated. She always told me, she's like, do whatever you want, just make sure you graduate university. Yeah. So, that as well, the support of my family was extremely important. And I really want to be able to give that to other girls that are probably in my situation.
Definitely. And is there any kind of education program specifically that you're supporting with the Sage Foundation, which does the same kind of, which provides that access to education for young women and girls?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that it's one of our pillars, as I mentioned to you. So everything that we do, even for example, if we're advocating for climate, we ensure that there's an educational component to it. If we're empowering women and girls, we advocate for education for women and girls. Yeah. So it is at the very root of everything that we advocate for.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's also a very good example of empowering people, again, to unmute them, right? So give people an education or give them access, involve them so they can have a voice, and so we know what's going on, and people, so no one can claim to be ignorant. And it's a very important thing that everything should be done to amplify that mission. So you've supported quite a few organizations and projects. Is there anyone, I know that's like asking a mom who's your favorite child, is there anyone that stands out to you? Is there any project that you say, well, this one, that was an amazing one?
You actually, that was a very good example. Yes, that's what it does feel like. Yeah. No, I mean, we've worked with a number of organizations, and they're all unique and amazing in their own ways. But one of the ones that we've worked with more recently, which I'll tell you about, is called Charmax. Charmax is a grassroots organization in Kabul, Afghanistan, who has converted old buses into mobile libraries. And what they do is they go from province to province and support kids, not just through reading or education, but also through psychosocial support. So again, that holistic, intersectional approach to development. And the girl who runs it, First Karim, she's incredible. She's extremely driven. She's a remarkable soul. So I really enjoyed working with her. And, and we've just been informed that the operations are resuming post, everything that has happened over the past few months. And, we're very excited to get back and start figuring out how we can run more programs in the next year.
Was there any difficulty staying in contact with them when, once the Taliban took over in Afghanistan? Or was that,
no, I mean, First has actually moved to the UK.
Okay.
She was one of the people that evacuated.
Okay.
And she's been amazing. She's not given up. I mean, I know that she's been taking some time to kind of process what's happened. Of course, it was a lot for her, but she's amazing, and she's getting right back in, and communicating with them was never an issue. So
okay. That's good. Well, that's good to hear. And for obvious reasons, you're very proud because someone who doesn't give up and, who shows the resilience and
Absolutely.
to resume operations that deserves all the support we could give it. What does the future of the Sage Foundation look like? So you're now helping, so many projects involved on so many levels. So am I correct to assume that you would like to be more active in more countries? Is it like you want to go more global, or are you more looking for an opposite approach, being more focused on specific countries, going more local? These are just two things, but might be.
No, I think our main focus is actually expanding the team.
Okay.
In the next couple of years to ensure that we're able to operate, in different parts of the world. Again, that's another thing that we take pride in. It's extremely important to be agile and to respond to, different situations, different contexts. So that's one of the things. And another part of it is actually looking outside finance for philanthropy. So mentorship and providing services for young girls, because, I mean, I know just a lot of the girls that I've met, for example, that I've worked with in Afghanistan, that have traveled abroad, just meeting with them and encouraging one another and speaking has gone a long way. So I think that's another thing that I really want to focus on in the next year is providing that support, not just emotionally, but also mentorship.
Okay. But you would like to do that across the board on more. So it's more like a methodological approach, if that's a word, to kind of getting multiple projects and really develop a kind of, one size fits all approach to helping, so to say, for a variety of projects.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe there's a one size fits all for it, but of course, with the same pillars that I mentioned, women's empowerment, education, environmentalism, and fitting that contextually to wherever we're operating.
Yeah. 100%. Well, that's great. It's so amazing. And I want to recommend also your Instagram, because there are beautiful pictures on there where you see the work that you're doing and the people you're supporting. And it must have taken tremendous effort to get it all going and to get it on the run. And I'm so happy to see that it's growing. You're also involved with UNICEF. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I work with UNICEF on a number of their projects. They're wonderful organizations, and for countries where we have very limited accessibility, conflict zones, they're a great organization to work with because they take all the necessary precautions, and they've got really great programs. So UNICEF, yes, it's I work as an advisor with them, and I work on one of their projects called Giga. Giga is a connectivity project, and I'll be very honest with you. To be at the start, I wasn't quite sure about it because going on ground and you see like people just need access to basic things, food, water, things like that, and then the pandemic happened. So what Giga is a connectivity project. So they're working with governments to map every single school in the world to ensure that every single child is connected to the internet, right? I didn't see the importance in that pre-pandemic, but obviously, after the pandemic hit, you start to see, how without that access, years and years of development progress was taken away. There was a gender report from the World Economic Forum that told us we've been set back by a generation with gender equality. That's tragic, and one of the things to me is women not being able to access education in some parts of the world, right? So child marriages were increasing, and so that's one of the projects that they're working on that's very fascinating. I recommend you take a look.
No, definitely, and I share your insights on that. The world post-pandemic, we're still in the pandemic, but fingers crossed that we'll soon be post-pandemic, that it's going to look very differently when it comes to the use of technology, and that many types of teaching and learning will be done at minimum in a hybrid format, if not just completely through technology, and that everyone in the world needs to have accessibility and be able to use technology to a big extent. We personally did a lot of work in countries like Albania and Ecuador, where public school teachers, they didn't have a plan B when all these lockdowns were there. So it was basically complete stagnation of teaching and learning. Schools need to close, that was clear. But then how are we going to proceed with teaching and learning? There just wasn't a plan, right? Whereas in the United Kingdom or Western Europe or the United States, I'm sure people have a plan or something like that. But in those countries, they didn't. So everyone just started randomly with their personal WhatsApp and sending assignments to their students or trying to get something going on Facebook or whatever, but there was nothing orchestrated, nothing centrally organized, because they never really thought about that. So a project like Giga, sounds like a very good one. If not for now, then also for later, because of course I hope it won't happen. But what if something like a pandemic happens again, right?
Well, we've got the climate crisis, right? And that's also quite detrimental.
Yeah.
And if we continue on this trajectory, we're not prepared.
Yeah.
A lot of governments aren't prepared. They really need to build resiliency to crises, right? So as you said, being agile enough to say, okay, schools have shut down. How can we continue teaching? Online support, for example, if children can't access school because there was a flooding.
Yeah.
Again, providing a platform where children can still engage and not be taken out of that school, because that interruption in most parts of the world, if they're not going to school for a prolonged period of time, they're very unlikely to go back, because the parents just don't see the return on investment on their kids going to school. So again, advocating to parents the importance of educating their children, providing resiliency with projects like Giga, things like that.
Yeah. Amazing work, Naza, and thank you for flying the flag here for all of those things. What is the biggest misconception around the work that you do?
I think one of the worst assumptions is that philanthropy is based around finance and funding, right? And when you invest, that you should see tangible results all the time. It's not always the case. There are times where projects are going to fail. There are times when things aren't going to work out, and we just have to be ready for that and to be able to explain to donors. And I think that's what a lot of the larger organizations are stuck in, having to answer to donors that want their money specific in an area. I think setting those expectations to say, this is something that we're piloting, this is, so I think that's the biggest misconception for me, I think.
Yeah, so you're basically saying it's not as easily accessible as people think, because there are lots of strings attached.
Absolutely,
with specific funding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done projects in Iran. We've built latrines for girls' schools to be able to keep them in school, and that hasn't gone through because of the pandemic, and because really being able to say, okay, well, this doesn't work this time. How can we do it better?
Yeah.
And setting those expectations from the start.
Yeah. I agree with you, because I think also the bigger the bag of money, the more complicated it gets. And from experience, I know it's also not like it's not like a day turnaround, right?
It's not linear,
it doesn't go very quick, and you need loads of lobbying, loads of conversations to get it all going. And then once you're there, and meanwhile, there are people in need that need the support. So it takes quite a bit to get that all in gear. But congrats for getting the Sage Foundation up to this level.
Thank you.
Now let's turn the tables. This is your Wise on Air, or your podcast. Who would you like to talk to?
Alive, or
it could be a seance as well. So it could be
for me, it's Edward Said. He's one of my favorite authors and intellectuals. So it would be him.
Okay.
If we can, resuscitate him some way somehow.
and could you elaborate a little bit on his books or anything specific that inspired you of his work?
Yeah. So one of my favorite books that I've read by him is called Orientalism.
Okay.
It actually expanded the field around anti-colonial and post-colonial studies. And for me, as a Middle Eastern woman, I've seen how those things have played into not just my psyche, but my day-to-day behaviors and the way I adopted a culture outside of my own as an immigrant. So his work was quite profound for me. It was a great, it was a great wake-up call, I would like to say.
Okay. And so forgive me because I haven't heard of him, but that doesn't mean anything. But is he a historian?
Yes, he was a Palestinian author.
Okay.
And he left Palestine during the conflict in 1948 and moved to New York. And, he was a professor at Columbia. He gave a lot of speeches. Unfortunately, he lost his life to cancer in early 2000, but he even, remarkable. I strongly recommend looking at his books.
I'm definitely going to, Naza. Now you said it's good. And you've also answered our other question, because that is, which reading has inspired you and would you recommend? But you said Orientalism by Edward Sage. Anything else that you like? Before we hit the record button, we were talking about podcasts. So anything specific other on a media level that you would like to share that has inspired you that maybe will inspire other people?
Yeah, I think something on a personal level is that element of self-care is a book that I read by Joe Dispenza, Becoming Supernatural. Really talks about the benefits of meditation and how to meditate. And he's a neuroscientist because I needed to see it from a scientific perspective.
Yeah.
So he really breaks it down in that book quite well. So I think in terms of personal development, that's something that I would definitely recommend.
Joe Dispenza. Yeah.
Yes.
He's a well-known author.
Yes.
And in those are definitely very good recommendations. I want to talk a little bit about your message for people listening in who have the ambition to also help others in the way that you do. So young girls out there of the next generation that basically say, hey, I also want to start something like the Sage Foundation or set up a foundation that helps people all over the world. What would be your advice to them?
Just do it, get on with it and start. The most important thing is to start. And I think if you speak to a lot of people who have organizations like the Sage Foundation, it always starts off as, well, I never really started like this.
Yeah.
It's always with a difference. So just whatever you're thinking about, do it and stay focused and believe in what you're doing, because eventually it will get to exactly where you're envisioning it to be.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you that there's a lot to be said for learning while doing. So lots of people think, well, no, I don't want to get started if I know 100,000% what I'm going to do and exactly, get the message right and whatever.
Sure.
But while going, you learn a lot as well.
Sure.
You need specific challenges and obstacles to make things grow and
getting comfortable with failure, right?
Yeah.
Really getting comfortable, because you will fail. It's natural. It's a part of life.
Yeah.
And getting comfortable with that and not letting it affect you to the extent that it stops your work.
Yeah.
But you take messages from it and learn from it and how to improve what you're doing. So I think getting comfortable with failure for me was a big one.
Yeah. Is it? No, same here, because it just isn't a nice feeling and you don't want to fail. I mean, but I do understand it. Like, could you speak maybe about one challenge that you encountered that you one of your failures that you basically said, okay, this one I'm not going to be able to overcome?
Right. Some of the advocacy campaigns that we do don't always necessarily turn out exactly how we want them to turn out.
Okay.
And instead of being discouraged, we focus on, with the Hope Dies Last campaign, it's an amazing campaign, but there was things that that was out of our control that went wrong, right? That didn't necessarily fail, but, that challenged us. So, I spoke with my team and, we had a breakdown. It's like, how do we do this better in the future?
Yeah.
How do we, where were the gaps? How do we make it bigger? How do we make it better? And, and I think definitely having a solid support system around you. I really have an amazing team around me.
Yeah.
Having a solid support system around you is very, very important, because they're the ones that can advise you and speak the truth to you and be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Naza, Alakija, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wish you all the best with the great work you're doing with the Sage Foundation. Specific call to action for people who want to get involved for Hope Dies Last. Get involved, inform yourself about what's going on there, and get in contact. I wish you nothing but the best. And of course, I wish you a great further summit. Naza, Alakija, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and/or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Kevin MacLeod for our beautiful theme music, Le Grand Chase. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles. Project coordination by Inva Cheney.